I'd like to welcome each of you to today's Gems from the Wisdom Traditions, a Conversation Circle session. And we have the good fortune of having with us once again Reverend Blayne Higa. And he was born in Hilo, graduated from Waiakea High School. He has a Master of Divinity degree from the Institute of Buddhist Studies in Berkeley, California, focusing on Shin Buddhist ministry and chaplaincy. And I want to say that I'm sorry to have identified him as a Zen Buddhist. He is a Shin Buddhist. And he's currently working at the Kona Hongwanji Buddhist Temple. And he also, before entering the ministry, spent over 17 years in state government and nonprofit fundraising. So he has a master's of public administration in keeping with Maurice Bishop. I think he's got a doctorate in public administration. So that's interesting that between the two of you, as well as a certificate in urban and regional planning from UH Manoa. And he received his bachelor's from Willamette University in Oregon. He's on the chair committee on social concerns at the mission where he's at. He serves on the board of the American Civil Liberties Union of Hawaii and also Vibrant Hawaii. So we're really fortunate to have Blayne with us today to take up a topic that we call chop wood, carry water. And this comes from a Buddhist terminology. Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. So given that very mysterious topic, I'm going to hand it over to Reverend Blayne.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Nice to see some familiar faces again. And so aloha, everybody. Thank you for being here. So today, as Renee mentioned, we're discussing a saying, right, which comes from the Zen Buddhist tradition. However, not being a Zen practitioner myself, I will share my appreciation for this teaching from the Shin Buddhist perspective. Both Zen and Shin Buddhism were founded in the 12th century, Japan, and there are many points of resonance between the thoughts of Dogen Zenji and Shinran Shonin, the respective founders of these traditions. And so let's take a moment, right, to reflect on the Zen saying, right? Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. So what do you think about this, right? Do you find it perplexing to think that, hey, wait, why would life be the same after enlightenment? Isn't life supposed to be different? What's going on here, right? So the question at the heart of this is, what is enlightenment? Is it a state of spiritual bliss to be achieved? Or is enlightenment something that is more subtle and continually happening in our ordinary everyday lives? We often think of enlightenment as a singular religious experience. However, wisdom continually unfolds as compassion in our lives, right? Revealing itself in the most ordinary of ways. The Shin Buddhist priest, the Reverend Kenryu Suji, says, each day we experience the joys and sadness of life. And with each living experience, we come to a deeper understanding of the totality of life, its beauty and ugliness, success and failures, victories and defeats, births and deaths. Every activity of life has absolute meaning. For every emotion, however significant, is the enlightenment experience. Enlightenment is found in the earthly realms of suffering, hunger, instinct, conflict, human frailties, and pleasure. For the spiritually awakened person, Enlightenment is here and now, amidst the trials and tribulations of human existence. So it was with the Buddha, Shinran Shonin, and all the other great religious leaders. After attaining enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, Shakyamuni Buddha did not become some magically awakened being, but rather was someone who practiced enlightened activity in all that he did, which included living his human life and eventually dying at the age of 80. The everyday realities of life does not stop. The Buddha taught us about the truths of birth, old age, sickness, and death, and becoming enlightened did not exempt him from these experiences. However, what enlightenment did was transform his perspective on life and how he related to these inescapable truths of impermanence. So Shinran Shonin, the founder of Jodo Shinshu, or Shin Buddhism, realized that the spiritual journey to perfect awakening in the Pure Land of enlightenment was a journey through imperfection. Shin Buddhist scholar Dr. Taitetsu Uno once described the Pure Land path as taking place by descending into the valley, the shadows of the mountain. He believes that it is in the valley and shadows where Shin spirituality flourishes, because it is where we encounter the dynamic working of Amida Buddha's wisdom and compassion. This metaphor illustrates Shinran's fundamental spiritual insight of imperfection and radical acceptance, which leads to a life of transformation, of healing, and compassionate action. Shinran's spiritual path was one of critical self-reflection about his own limitations as a human being, by awakening to the activity of perfect wisdom and compassion in his life. And haven't we been journeying through the valley and shadows for these past 17 months of the pandemic? Professor Mark Uno described Shinran's spiritual awakening as, at the deepest level, Shinran saw himself as the recipient of the gift of the Dharma, rather than its dispenser. His true Buddhist identity came into relief only in the solitary light of his own self-awareness. It was in this realization of Dharma and enlightenment, right, as activity, as gift, that Shinran saw his full humanness, in which served as the foundation for his life. In similar fashion, we can own our brokenness, own our humanness, and transform our imperfections into a source of compassion. The Shin Buddhist path views the shadow of our imperfections as the reason for a life of awakening, right? The life of being quote unquote enlightened, right? So this life of honest self-reflection and transformation is essential to understanding Shinran's view of human nature and of Shin spirituality. So how does this realization of imperfection function in our life? How does, Shin spirituality lead to a life of transformation and change? And so, again, according to the Reverend Dr. Taitetsu Uno, this light of Amida Buddha not only illuminates our darkness, it transforms it, so that we try our best to be compassionate with a sense of humility and gratitude, mindful of our karmic limitations. Humility arises from having been shown our karma-bound self, yet grateful for the boundless compassion that inspires us to act with new and vigorous appreciation for life. And so Dr. Uno's words aptly describes a Shin Buddhist spirituality of imperfection and how it can serve as a foundation for our lives. So let me share with you a poem by a devout Shin Buddhist follower from Kona, actually. Her name was Chiyono Sasaki, and she was an Issei, or first generation Japanese American, Japanese immigrant to Hawaii. And she found profound appreciation for the working of the Dharma, of the Buddha's teachings, in her life. And so her poem is entitled Kono Mama, or As I Am. And so this term, this Japanese term of Kono Mama, expresses what it means to trust, to truly entrust oneself to the compassionate working of the Buddha, right? Of timeless reality of wisdom and compassion in our lives. Fully embraced and affirmed by true compassion, a person realizes that one's whole self, and therefore one's entire life, is fine just as it is. Kono Mama. The aim of Shin Buddhism is to bring about the realization of this spiritual contentment arising from a life of naturalness. And so this is her poem, As I Am. I am so happy about being as I am that I naturally bow my head. Being good or bad, I am what I am. Being false or true, I am what I am. Having or not having, I am what I am. Rain or shine, I am what I am. Crying or laughing, I am what I am. Being dissatisfied with what I am, how greedy can I be? Being as I am does not change. It cannot be changed. Oni Oya-sama affirms me, calling, come as you are. Because of not knowing that I am as I am, I wander about, lost and confused. Because the compassion of Oya-sama is all-embracing, I am now contained within it. Oya-sama is pleased and I am happy too, living together with Oya-sama daily. Every time I listen to Oya-sama working for my sake, I feel both ashamed and grateful. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. And so, Chiyono Sasaki, was just a farmer, a laborer, in Kona, who didn't have much education, and didn't spend much time studying the Dharma, right? Studying the teachings, but she intuitively grasped, right, the what it means to follow the path, what it means to live with her imperfections, right? An awakening to the working of wisdom and compassion in her life. And so in that moment, right, of realization of our own limitation and the love and the compassion of the universe working in our lives, in that moment, right, was her moment of aha, the moment of awakening for her, right, which then didn't change the nature of her life in terms of having to live an ordinary daily life, right? So, which brings us back to the saying that we're talking about, right? Before enlightenment, chop wood and carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood and carry water, right? So let's talk about this. Let's discuss this. What do you think about the saying and about the activity, right, of being on a spiritual path, right, which allows us to see life in a different way. So
well, I feel greatly cheered by all that you've just said, because I certainly am very aware of my imperfections. And it just sounds like such an embracing teaching that no matter where we are on our spiritual path, that we all have that ability to learn, to give, to gain greater wisdom, and to exude more compassion for others. And that's where it really is what it sounds like. I don't know where you put a marking point as to when we've transferred over into the enlightenment realm and when we haven't attained it yet, but I don't get a sense that there needs to be that sharp line, maybe.
Right. I think if we think of enlightenment, right, as a goal, or as a as the kind of this the end of a journey, right? That then we're looking for, right, something to achieve, something to attain, something to, right, strive for, right? And we may fail at that, right? But if we think of enlightenment as a continual process of growth, of learning, of self-reflection and development, right? That every moment of our lives is a moment of awakening, right? Everything in our lives can help us to reflect and to grow and to learn, right? And so, what a wonderful way to live, right? There's endless possibilities, right? But yet we are still got to pay the bills. We still have to drive through traffic. We still have to, right, wash the dishes. But right, the way we encounter or the way we respond to these everyday things of life, that changes, right? Just our perspective, right? Our appreciation, right? And that's the most powerful thing. That's what the Buddha taught us, right? Is that, with our minds, we create the world, right? To think or act with meanness, or to act with kindness, right? This all springs from our mind, right? And so we have immense capacity for goodness, for kindness, but we also understand, right? We have immense capacity for harm. And so being mindful of our thoughts, being mindful of our words, being mindful of our actions, on a daily basis, that is the path, right? That we're living it. So.
What do you think?
Just to tag on what, in the spirit of what Renee was saying, when you were speaking, I felt like I didn't have to hold this big bag behind me. I'm carrying all this stuff about who I should be, or why didn't I do that, or how is this person gonna think about me, or or this, that, or the other. And I was able to kind of just let go of this bag. So it really does lighten up, and it's very refreshing. It's almost like coming out of a deep sleep and you're very refreshed. But how in waking life can we be refreshed, And I think remembering this and just taking that bag off is something. When you did speak about, well, what is before and after enlightenment, the idea that came to me was duty. That whether you're before enlightenment or after enlightenment, you have duty. Well, what is duty? Duty is what's before you, whatever is before you. And then, of course, sometimes it's defined, but I'm not an expert in all these things, as dharma, as duty. But maybe you could say a few things about that. How do you respond to the idea of duty as before and after enlightenment? You're still doing duty.
Yeah, I think of it maybe more as the responsibility, right? That we have a responsibility, right? As a someone following a spiritual path, as a human being, we always have responsibility, right? And so, but we have responsibility to caring for self and caring for other, right? And that in the realization that we are interconnected and interdependent in life, is the wellspring, right? This of responsibility, right? Being responsible for my actions, being responsible for what I do, because it affects the lives of others. Right? We see it all the time, right? During this pandemic, right? Taking responsibility for wearing a mask, right? For the sake of not for my sake, but for the sake of others, because of what potential harm I could do to another person, right? So always thinking about this idea of responsibility, right, or duty, right, I think is right, is central to to any spiritual path that we walk, because we understand that we do not live in isolation. We do not live alone in this world. And because we don't live alone, we have responsibility, right? To live in a way that benefits both self and others. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Bob.
Yeah. Wow.
Hi, I'm a Zen practitioner,
Mm.
so I practice from that perspective.
Mhm.
But I've always been very attracted to some of the Shin sayings. The Buddhist Study Center, I remember maybe about 20, 25 years ago, I read this article in the newsletter, and it was talking about the Bodhisattva vows, the save all beings, which is Dharma and responsibility. But I remember the focus of the talk, and it might have been by Mark Uno, I'm not sure, but the focus of the talk was on the second of the great vow, four great vows. And it's in Sino-Japanese, it's Bono Mujin Seigan Dan.
Mm.
Bono is greed, hatred, and delusion.
Mhm.
Rise endlessly.
Mhm.
I vow to cut them off, mow them down, let them go. And his point was that Bono arises endlessly, constantly. Greed, hatred, and anger arise. The bag is on our back, and we never get rid of it. We never lose greed, hatred, and anger, and yet that is a blessing as well. That's the way we are, as you read in the poem. That's how we are, and we can, if we acknowledge that, we can accept the help that can come to us. Help is on the way. And I just remember, I keep going back to that line of, and I wish I know I cut it out, but I think I lost it in the mess of my books. But that article on Bono was just very interesting for me.
Yeah, thank you. Right, in Jodo Shinshu, we talk a lot about bonno, or this idea of, I think the Sanskrit word is kleshas, right, or our fetters, our attachments, actually, right, and these things are what, like Bob mentioned, right, these are the things that hold us back. These are the things that are the monkeys on our back, right, that keeps us trapped, right, from living a full, an authentic, life of freedom, right, that the Dharma offers, right? And the Dharma points us to seeing these things, right, and to acknowledging it, right, and to owning it, right? And in Shinran's thought, right, it's this idea of owning our imperfections, owning our bonno, right, not ignoring it, not saying that we are going to be perfect at eliminating it entirely, because for Shinran, he understood for himself, he was not capable of eliminating all of his blind passions, all of his fetters, right? His ego, his greed, his anger, his selfishness, right? And so, so that's why there is this working of enlightenment coming to us always, right? That we are shown ourselves, our true selves, right, in the light of wisdom, in the light of compassion, which allows us, right, which then transforms all this stuff into the seed of awakening, right? So, that's the one thing about Shinshu, right? Is that we look at enlightenment, right, as something that won't happen in our lifetime, in this present life, like full, complete, perfect awakening, because for me, as I know, I'm not going to be able to be like, a perfect Buddha, who can let go of everything, and to be able to see from a mind, right, that is more expansive than narrow, right? That is our human condition, to always fall back into these narrow perspectives, these narrow views, right? That's our human nature. That's our, Shinran, in Shinshu, we talk about Bombu, or a foolish being who is bound by our bonno, our fetters. And so, but once we, own our imperfections, once we own our limitations, that's the life of freedom, right? It no longer has power over us because we can see it, we can know it, and then we can kind of be able to, be mindful of that, right? To live with critical self-reflection, right? Oh, how am I doing? How am I being? Right? Oh, someone cut me off on the freeway on H1. What do you say? What is your first reaction? Or someone, so, right? So there, in that split moment, right? We fall right back into who we truly are as human beings, despite living a spiritual life. So,
Or we don't.
or we don't. Yeah.
And then we've made that little bit of breakthrough further.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and it's interesting if we think about breaking through, when we talk about chopping wood, carrying water, it's interesting. Dogen Zenji said, delusion is going to the 10,000 things.
Mm-hmm.
Enlightenment is the 10,000 things coming to us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's chopping wood and carrying water. But
Mm-hmm.
from what perspective
Mm-hmm.
are we doing that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Cliff,
Right?
do you have something you wanted to mention there?
I was thinking about the Karate Kid movie, where he goes, to the teacher, and the teacher, instead of teaching him, he has him do all these tasks like washing or waxing the car and painting the fence and so forth. And I think I've heard the story that a lot of people will come to a teacher to gain enlightenment, but the teacher will have them do stuff rather than, why are you, and then I think one advanced disciple asked the teacher, why when people come to seek enlightenment, do you just give them jobs to do? And he says, well, not most people coming to get enlightenment don't really want enlightenment. They're looking for something to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if maybe the path, the Eightfold Path, is not so much in the what, but in the how we go about. And maybe the teacher, like in the Karate Kid, was able to give subtle teachings along the way while the mind was occupied with the outer task of duty or so forth. Can you say something about the idea of how we do things?
Yeah, that's a good question and a good point that right, it's so easy to learn about any spiritual teachings from a book, right, from a writing, but it's more meaningful to actually be able to live a path, right, to live a teaching, right? That's how we learn by doing, right? That it is an embodied, that we embody the teachings through our actions, our words, our thoughts. Dogen Zenji, right, and the Zen tradition, the idea, right, that sometimes the misnomer, right, is that you do Zazen to attain enlightenment, but in reality, right, I think Bob knows this, right, is that Zazen is the actualization of what is there, of what is your true state, right? That is this present, right? And same as in Shin Buddhism, the Nembutsu, or the saying of the Buddha's name, Namo Amida Butsu, is this moment of realization, this moment of bowing my head to this working of enlightenment in my life that is already present, right? And so what flows from that, right? Once we have this realization, right, of our true nature, right, of the path, then our life becomes this natural extension of the path, right? We're living the path, right? Because there's nothing else that we can do but live this path, right? That, right, from that understanding, right, versus striving to practice, to do, to right, a life of naturalness, a life of living the Eightfold Path, of truly living it, right, in everything that we do, versus saying, okay, I do step one, then I do step two, then I do, right, that you know, you can do it. I mean, and you know, monastics do it all the time. But for those of us who aren't monastics, who aren't, you know, but how do we do this, right? Right. So I think it begins right with everything begins with right view, right? That perspective of how do we understand, right? So and so when we understand, then we can. That's the how, right? How that's how we do.
Thank you.
Mary?
Hello, Reverend. I was very, a couple of things that you said really touched me, especially compassion with humility, because I see that the older we are, hopefully, we're getting better at accepting who we are and the faults, you know, our faults that we're going to carry until we die, and how we learn, and that is, then we can share it. And I think by what you said about compassion with humility, that's a hard one to do, but we're all on a path. We're all striving for that ultimate end. And thank you.
Right. It's a reminder that we need to be compassionate to ourselves, right? Be kind to ourselves, right? First and foremost, we, you know, we learn the most when we do things wrong, right? When we fail at something, right? True growth, true learning, right, happens at the edge of our comfort and at the point where we try and fail, right? And try again.
If we never try, we don't even have the opportunity to fail. So the fact that we've made the effort in and of itself is some sort of success, from which, okay, we may fail, but just the fact that we tried in itself is a success. So we've made a little inching forward.
Right. And so if we go back to the story of the Buddha, of Shakyamuni Buddha, right? He practiced, you know, as, you know, for 6 years, right, in the forest. He practiced ascetic practices and meditations and other things for 6 years, and he failed. He still did not find his way out of suffering, his enlightenment. After 6 years, he then sat under the Bodhi tree and looked within to discover the truth for himself, right? Shinran Shonin, for 20 years, was a monk on Mount Hiei, following the Tendai school of Buddhism. And even after 20 years of trying to perfectly practice and to learn and to do, he felt like a failure and was no closer to enlightenment than when he first started his journey 20 years earlier. That's when he discovered the Pure Land path and discovered this working of wisdom and compassion that we understand to be Amida Buddha, the Buddha of infinite light and life, working in his life, right? Coming to him, already working for his enlightenment. If these spiritual teachers didn't try and didn't do and didn't fail, we would not be the beneficiaries of their wisdom today, right? And we all know this is true in our own lives, right? As we get more experience, not necessarily get older, but as we gain more experience in life, right? As we experience more things, we learn more. Our perspectives are broadened. Our horizons are opened up. We discover things that we, you know, about ourselves, right? In every experience, right? Because nothing's ever wasted. Every experience is valuable and important. All experiences won't be necessarily easy, right? And some experiences are downright hard, and difficult and sad, and you know, but it is in those moments too that we learn, right? And the Buddha talked about, right, the, you know, that there's dissatisfaction in life, that there is suffering, right? But suffering is about learning about ourselves.
I was wondering how in your tradition you might be able to deal with pairs of opposites that we usually encounter. Somehow whether it's pain and pleasure or good and evil? Is that there is such an idea of evil? Um, how do you deal with that? Do you have a scripture that, for example, like the Dhammapada or whatever, that you would refer to be of help to allow people to begin to, as you were putting it earlier, see the broader picture, see things more broadly? Could you say something about that in terms of the how to deal with the pairs of opposites?
You know, Shin Buddhism, right, comes from the Mahayana school of thought of Buddhism, just like Zen and other forms. And so, we all ascribe to this idea or this notion of, right, non-duality, this ultimate non-duality of life, of experience, right? But in the Shin tradition, we talk about duality a lot, right? Self and Amida, that there is this kind of self and other, right? But when we go beyond that, right, when we really think about that relationship, it is a non-dual relationship, right? In our experience, and if we really, really think about it. So we talk about non-duality, right, in a dualistic way in Shin Buddhism, right? So sometimes it gets kind of, misunderstood or convoluted, right? But Shinran, talks a lot about, knowing what is good, knowing what is evil, right? But for what Shinran, when he talks about evil, he's not talking about like a Western concept of evil necessarily, like an inherent evil. What he's talking about is anything that keeps us from the path, right? From our relief of suffering, right? Things that hold us back from our awakening, right? So this idea of karmic evil is talked about, but it's a very different sense of what good of what evil is, right? And so what Shinran realized, or what he is, that we can't know what is fully good or what is fully evil in our own, as a limited human being, right? Only the working of the Buddha, of timeless reality, of can know, because we're not Buddha. We don't have this perfect awareness, right? But we can get glimpses, right, of and we know from living this path what is more wholesome, what is less wholesome in life. And so, like in Shin Buddhism, we don't take precepts like maybe other schools of Buddhism do, but we actually naturally live the precepts without taking them, right? That's the ideal, right? Whether we succeed or not necessarily, or do it perfectly or not, that's kind of in question all the time, right? But we can always try, right, to live more compassionately, more mindfully, right? So
would you say that you can live the precepts from your heart?
Yeah, I think it has to begin here, right? It has to begin in the heart, right? But it has to actually be lived, expressed, right, and shared, right? Because I was reading an article recently by this American writer, Parker Palmer, right? He talks about the idea of American democracy, and about democracy lives in the heart, or begins in the heart. This idea of democracy, right? And so it has to live and inhabit there, and then we can, live it and actually make it alive, right, through our actions. Same thing with the Dharma, same thing with any spiritual teachings. It has to live within our hearts in order to be able to flow through our lives.
That would be like the source of the precept.
Bob, did you have something? I saw your hand up earlier.
Yeah. In Zen, we have a saying, not to put a head on top of your head. And I think that kind of has something to do with it as well. As you said, you can say, oh, I failed. I failed at something. It's another thing to say, I'm a failure. In other words, then you've put a head on top of your head. Failing is fine. It's like breathing. You just do these things. At the same time, if you get stuck, well, then I'm stuck. But if you really lock into it, then, as I say, you put a head on top of your head, and that's when dualism gets bad. When you are actually dual in yourself. There's a koan that says, if you talk about good and evil, you are a person of good and evil. You're walking the path you walk, and how you walk it is your choice. And that's part of it, I think, too. The heart mind is something that is part of your vow, but failing at the vow is probably not the best way to focus on doing the vow.
Yeah, right. Because we're so caught up with doing the vows perfectly or achieving these vows perfectly, right? When we're so caught up with that, that's when we fail, right? And we stop naturally living the vows, right? I think there's great resonance between Shinran and Dogen. I think sometimes they're thought of as two sides of the same coin sometimes in their thought, right? I have great appreciation for Dogen and for the Zen tradition, because I do see a lot of similarities in terms of how we understand, right, the experience, right, of awakening, right, and the path that we walk, and that we live.
Blaine, can I ask you something about the experience of damned if you do, damned if you don't? Knowing that no matter what choice I make, I know it's going to be imperfect. I know there are imperfections if I choose this and imperfections if I choose that. There's no perfect choice that I see available to me. Maybe kind of like the willingness to say, okay, but just the fact that I take one of these roads carries me a little farther, because then I will have knowingly made a choice in this direction. And so whatever results come back to me, I know what those came from. Oh, okay, I see why that happened, because I knew what decision I was taking. And so I've learned from that. And so there's something worthwhile in it. And I at least am not stuck in kind of being, what do you call it? Like stalemated, not moving at all. That seems to be worse than making a wrong choice in some ways. Something like that. Could you address that?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. That's the conundrum we all face, right? Is wanting to do the best that we can, right? To make the best decisions possible. But we have to understand all decisions have consequences, both positive and negative, right? And we can only make decisions based on the information that we have at hand at the time that we're making that decision, right? And so, which ultimately means we make decisions based not on a perfect understanding of every situation, right? That we make decisions based on imperfect understanding, right? But we can make decisions based on better understanding, right? On a little bit more clarity, a little bit more information, a little bit more. But ultimately, we make decisions, right? And we have to, because if not, like Renee, you said, we would not ever move forward. We'd be immobilized if we're waiting for the perfect answer, right? Or the perfect amount of, to know perfectly before acting, right? Because then we wouldn't be able to if we did everything perfectly, we would never learn anything. Ultimately, right? I mean,
That's why the Buddha said, we're so lucky to be born as human beings. You know, damned if you do, damned if you don't. If you're
yes.
damned all the time, you'd be a demon. Well,
Yeah.
no chance. If
Yeah.
you are perfect in all things, then you're a heavenly being. No chance.
No chance.
You have to be engaged as a human being
Yep.
to become enlightened.
Yes.
No other being has the chance to be enlightened.
Yeah.
Of the 5 forms of of existence.
Right. Right. Hard is it to be born into human life. Now we're living it. Difficult it is to hear the teachings of the Blessed One. Now we hear them. Right. If we do not gain emancipation in this present life.
Blaine,
Yeah.
I've got a question for you. Would you say the mind is like a sword that cuts both ways? It both creates the world of Maya and Mara, and yet also is what the tool, the sword by which we can liberate ourselves from Maya and Mara. I remember the Dalai Lama once saying that the nature of the mind is pure light, but also it seems that there's an awful lot of confusion and darkness in the mind. I recently heard a talk or an interview with this fellow who wrote a book called "The Body Keeps Score," and the idea in that is the body kind of knows what's going on, but the mind does an awful lot of hard work to hide ourselves from the traumas, from our failures, from all our imperfections and so forth. This idea that you were sharing early in your talk about acceptance and more or less going into the valley of darkness, kind of, I think there's a phrase you might have used. Can you say more about that, how to do that in a way that is productive?
Yeah. So when we come to acknowledge, right, our own limitations, our own failures, our own weaknesses, right, our humanness, right, that's the point where we come to know this working of wisdom and compassion in our lives that's beyond us, right, this working of the universe, right, the working of enlightenment that we know is working in our lives because we're made to see ourselves, we're made to see our limitations, we're made to see our failures, right? Because wisdom light is being shined on us, right? Allowing us to see ourselves more clearly. But it doesn't stop there, right? That in that realization, right, opens up the freedom for us to make friends with our shadow, right? That with light, there's always shadow, right? There's always, light and shadow are, they can't exist without the other. And so as human beings, we have to be able to own both our light and our shadow, right? Even though we don't want to see our shadow, right? But that's our ego as well, talking that, oh, I'm better than that, or I don't want to see that, right? About myself. But it is when we see that, we're made to see that, right? Through the working of wisdom and compassion. One of my teachers had this analogy of, when a light is shined in a darkened room, right? And we see like these flecks of dust, right? Is the light revealing the dust? Or is the dust, because of the dust, we can see the light, right? So right, something to think about, right? About the nature of our shadows, or the nature of our stuff that's floating around. Does that stuff allow us to be able to see light, to see our, so.
I think I may have to research some of the Popeye episodes, because I Am What I Am is really his theme, and I'm just curious if there might be some Buddhist thought that the Japanese woman from Kona, her
Mm.
poem just brought that to light for me.
Mm.
That enlightenment means that understanding of I am what I am, and wherever I go, there I am, and all the permutations of that idea. And in some way, it's a sense of surrendering, of just letting go. Similar to the Buddha trying for 6 years, and when he stopped trying, came enlightenment.
Yeah, thank you. But there's a thing too, right? It doesn't just end there, right? This awareness of I am what I am, right? Because once we accept ourselves, once we can kind of own who we are, that opens up a life of freedom, right? That in a life of transformation, though, right? To be able to continually see ourselves, to self-reflect, to be aware of that, right, is the power to move forward in our lives, right? The power to be a little bit more, to be a little bit better every day, because we know who we are. But we don't have to beat ourselves up for being who we are either, right? We don't have to cling to an idea of perfection or cling to an idea that we have to be this in order to be on the path. How does that open the gates of practice for us, of living for us, right? When we're not trapping ourselves in the illusion of perfection, in the illusion of I have to do it X, Y, and Z perfectly, right? I have to change myself because of this. We will naturally change ourselves when we entrust in this process, in this path, because we become, right? It's a path of becoming.
There was a modern teacher, Soen Roshi, who talked about that as a life of endless vow, to save all beings, to follow all dharmas, to follow the Buddha way. It is an endless vow, just as accepting your klesha is an endless vow of, I'm deluded, but I'll drop that. I'm angry, but like you said, how do you deal with that anger? There are ways, and that's the life of endless vow that he talked about, and I thought that was very telling as well. It sort of says what you were saying.
Bob, are you saying vow with a V or bow with a B?
Oh, I think he was talking about bow with a V, right? But it's true. I think both bow with a B and vow with a V work, right? How do we engage life, right? When we talk about in Buddhism, right, this idea of gasho, this idea of putting our palms together in Anjali, right? Is palms together, right, with head bow. Can we approach life with our hands together and our head bowed, right? To be receiving what life is offering, to be receptive, right? To be grateful for life and all of its contradictions, how does approaching life in that spirit of our hands together and our heads bowed change the way we view life, change the way we react to tough situations?
What I was saying was the great vows, the vow. But you're right. I mean, how can you ever take the great vows without being incredibly humble in accepting that you are the kind of being you are, with greed, hatred, and delusion constantly arising? You have to be humble to be able to take the next step.
Well, was it Shinro Suzuki, right? Talked about there are no enlightened beings. There's only enlightened activity. And I think that's true, right? When we think about path, when we think about the spiritual path, we're talking about enlightened activity, and living enlightened activity, right? Not being something better, not being something holier than thou, or something special, right? But being human, being real, being authentic, and living this path, living our lives, right? And living out and embodying the vows of the Bodhisattva.
In the most difficult of circumstances, sometimes, in the most adversity, when we seem as if we are most failing, trudging through and not seeing our way, that may be when we're like actually close to some huge aha that will carry us further.
Something Bob said, and he said it earlier on too. I think when we drop the pretense that we're not ignorant and unkind and all of those other words that you used, that human life brings to us, when we accept that that's what it is to be human, I think that lends us, like everyone else is having the same, and that to me feels like the gateway to compassion, when we recognize it within ourselves.
Right, so much has been talked about in these past 2 years about empathy in America and how we have an empathy deficit. And so, right, once we can kind of drop pretense and begin to start seeing ourselves as more connected and more alike with others, right? All beings have the same fears, right? Same hopes, same dreams, right? Of a life that is peaceful, a life that is, lived well. When we can start seeing that again, right? That is the basis of empathy, right? The basis of being able to step into someone else's shoes.
It's interesting how technology has allowed us to foster that pretense. Like even here in Zoom, I can turn a setting on that will remove my blemishes, right? Or disguise my dirty background. And in selfies, right? And it's why teenage suicide is on the rise, because if I don't get any likes, on my cleaned up photoshopped version of myself, right? So pretense has become the foundation on which people are living their lives. It's like pretense now has taken a technological upswing and creating this deficit.
And yet, don't you feel as if we have so much more access through technology to these amazing teachings from so many teachers over such a vast period of time that we never had access to before?
Right, the pandemic, right? If we look at that, right, the past year and a half has been hard, but also it has been an opportunity for us to innovate and to expand, right? And to use technology also in a positive way, not just in a negative way, right? But to use it mindfully, to use it to connect people, right? To be able to share, to be able to cultivate relationships, right? Safely while being apart, right? So as we kind of look at our lives and we look at the things, right? There's always going to be, right, positive and negative, right? The pluses and the deltas, right? But can we, right, be mindful of how we use that technology, right? So
we do want to so sincerely thank you for sharing with us not your knowledge, but your true life experience from the heart, and in a way that I think spoke to our hearts and made it feel as if we could live a life that had a little more light in it, and there was a little more hope, a little more meaning, even in doing the dishes. If we don't chop wood or carry water, most of us still do the dishes. I'd love for us all to just give a little round of thanks to Blaine. This was a really marvelous session that we all gained so much from. And you're welcome. At any point in time, you can join us again.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. So wonderful to be with all of you again.
Thank you, Blaine.
Thank you.
Mahalo. Have a wonderful weekend. Aloha.